Did pirates really have peg legs? I'm Stephanina, and I'm not a historian. My area of expertise lies in other areas. Specifically, the area previously occupied by my dead foot. I recently acquired my first ever peg leg. My first steps on the aforementioned peg leg were eye-opening. Whoa, that feels weird. Yeah, I think safety is a good idea. Those steps also begged the question, did real people actually use these things? It just wants to do that.
Yeah, there's no foot out there to stop it from doing that.
Hardly a pirate.
Yeah, it's not an ideal walking situation.
Problem. Peg legs don't have feet. Turns out feet are very important. I thought I had learned this lesson. Apparently not well enough. Let me show you what I mean. If I walk, it slips out because there's nothing in front of it to keep it from doing that. Contrast that to a more foot-shaped foot. I always like to keep extra feet lying around. Same motion, the foot stops it from sliding. It comes down to physics. Shocker, I know. But having a foot-shaped block of wood at the end of your peg leg works wonders. It's almost like there's a reason why humans have actual feet instead of leg pegs. An L shape versus just a plain old stick is a big difference in walking. Not to put too fine a point on it, but I'm extremely skeptical that this was ever a thing. Let me tell you why. It should also be noted that I have a modern day socket. The socket that was used for my peg leg is actually something called a test socket, which was part of the process of making my real deal final leg. But we have this leftover test piece, and so my prosthetist made a piece of wood around it. Isn't it glorious? A special thank you to my prosthetist for making this peg leg for me. This socket is not a hunk of wood. It is not strapped to my leg. It has modern suspension, which makes me sound like a car, but that's just what all this stuff is. And that makes a big difference in walkability. See, it does that.
I can angle the bottom because it looks like it's pitching to the outside just a little bit.
Keep in mind, she has a professional who can make prosthetic adjustments. He talks. But here's something maybe you haven't thought of. If you were a pirate and you lost your leg, would you have the surgical techniques that I have as a modern amputee? Did you know that when you go chopping off limbs, they actually have some technique to it? They don't just guillotine the thing. They bevel the bone. They make it so there aren't sharp bits sticking out. They kind of smooth things down, get the corners off. Then they carefully deal with the nerves and the layers of skin and muscle and tissue and put it all back together in a tidy little package. Especially if it was blasted off by a cannon or something as a pirate. You're gonna have jagged edges, bits of bone, fragments of stuff, and nerve damage, all sorts of issues in there. That hurts. You're not going to want to step on it. Also worth noting, you are far less likely to die of You are far less likely to die of infection if your leg is amputized. I can't think with the cat there. Far less likely to die of infection if your leg is amputated in a sanitary environment, like a modern surgical room, versus, I don't know, Bob's Cutlass just hacked Jack and now it's coming for your leg. Hello, sweetheart. After Blackbeard's Cutlass has cut through a few of your mates, and then it comes for Lefty, it's a little less sanitary, and while I'm sure pirates were very careful to disinfect their cutlasses and sabers and whatnot, it's not the most sanitary way to lose a limb. Odds of infection, in my non-doctor opinion, are much higher. Not a doctor here, just a pirate. But you do you. If you'd prefer to amputate via pirate, that's your choice. But on your own leg, be it. Infection is a killer. As such, the odds that you've got a bunch of one-legged pirates scurrying around on deck with peg legs is automatically not that likely to be a common scene. In fact, I wonder if one reason why we have these illustrations or stereotypes of pirates on peg legs is precisely because they were uncommon. When you think about it, if you see something that is out of the blue, never seen it before, it sticks in your memory. You're more likely to stick it in a book if you're a writer, or in a song if you're a songwriter, in a picture if you're a painter, because it caught your attention. For all we know, the pictures we do have of pirates on a peg leg might have been created by either people who had no experience with it, or maybe they saw a pirate on a peg leg and were like,
"That is weird. I'm drawing that."
It might have been because it's out of the ordinary that it was worth drawing. I don't know, I wasn't there. But just the biomechanics, it strikes me as improbable that any self-respecting pirate who can whittle himself a leg, a wooden something to stand on, would not give himself a foot and make his life easier. I'm still skeptical. That is like building a wagon and choosing to use square wheels when you could have just as easily have made it with round wheels. I mean, it's not rocket science, which is good because, pirates didn't have rockets. I'm not an engineer, but the problem and solution was immediately apparent to me within literally one or two steps on this peg leg, that yikes, it needs a foot. That is the problem here. So a pirate, someone who works with his hands all day presumably, to suppose that he would not also have this thought of, hey, this would work better if there was something on the front, like a wooden foot, a block, something. This strikes me as not giving pirates enough credit for their ingenuity and tenacity and whittling skills. Also keep in mind, traction is a thing, unless it isn't. Before my prosthetist put on a little piece of rubber on the bottom of the leg, it was a lot slipperier, and I was walking on carpet. Pirates weren't walking on carpet. They were walking on things that were slicker, like wet sea decks on ye old boat. Or what about cobblestone streets? Which is another reason why I find it highly improbable that the majority of amputees, pirate or not, would go for that shape. Now, if you've never tried walking on a sawed-off bone, I have news for you. It doesn't feel that good. Feet work much better. Definitely comfier. 10 out of 10, highly recommend. But since Lefty and I have parted ways, I've had the experience of walking on a severed tibia. And it should be noted, that is with advantage of modern medicine. Even if they survived the infection and blood loss and all of that, and other pirates trying to stab them while they're down, even if you survived all those things and somehow healed up, I don't think you'd want to step on that leg. Because I'm picturing, if you haven't beveled the bone, you've got sharp corners and edges on that bone. And every step you take, those sharp edges are going to be cutting into the muscle that wraps around the bone. Maybe it's rubbing on nerves. And then you stick it in a hunk of wood and hope for the best. I cannot envision an actual pirate walking around on a peg leg, which sounds uncomfortable even as a modern amputee, to say, yeah, let's actually strap a piece of wood and hope for the best. I don't think a pirate who had subpar medical attention is going to have a leg that's in good enough shape to be able to use a full wooden peg leg for any significant amount of time in a day. I'm not buying it. So, this is pretty cool. Works as a telescope too. If I were a pirate and for some reason carved a peg leg, tried to take a step on it, I would not want to keep walking with that. But because I'm me, I decided to keep walking on ye old peg leg because Halloween's a thing. And I was going to wear this peg leg and impress my children. They totally weren't impressed. Look, I'm a pirate. Please. I got this leg last week. And I've been using it because I wanted to get used to it before Halloween and trick-or-treating and having to walk around the neighborhood begging for candy. That's what you do when you have kids. Now I feel like, yeah, I can use this without the assistance of a cane, but at first I couldn't. Am I better at it now? Definitely. But be it noted, you have to walk differently. Basically, you can't use your knee because remember, if you have a force pushing this way, it tips. So you need to do this, which means you're not really moving very efficiently, but you can make it work. So I do feel a lot more comfortable with the peg leg than I did on day one, but it still is a subpar shape for an actual prosthetic leg. If I needed the wood to be this wide to accommodate my calf, I would not whittle it down to a fine point like this. Maybe I would scoop out the middle a little bit, kind of like an hourglass shape, but I would want something on the end here to keep me from slipping, because it only takes 1 or 2 steps before you realize this is a terrible idea. Think of an eye walk. They don't have a peg on the bottom. They have like a little block under there. That's a great idea. I think pirates are smart enough to have thought of that. No amputee would say, yeah, that's the way to go. In the spirit of fairness, I do have to point out the one area where the peg leg outperforms my normal prosthetic leg. Getting pants on and off. Way easier if there's no foot at the end of that stick. Turns out you can just slide your pant legs over it. Super easy. Who knew? If you're not familiar with how hard it is to put pants on and off as an amputee, it's hard. As far as historical evidence goes on whether or not pirates had peg legs, I can't. Turns out that's hard to come by. People on the internet do not always cite their sources. So, ahoy there. A cursory glance on ye olde internet was unsatisfactory. People will often go on the internet and say, this is how it was, but they don't cite their sources. So then you come across somebody else who says, nah, exact opposite is how it was. And they also don't cite their sources. Here again, I'm not a historian. I was trying to do some proof of concept testing and found it severely lacking in proof of concept. I just find it completely implausible that real people would favor this shape when it would be fairly easy to make it a different shape. Well, me matey, 'twas a random video. If you'd care for another chat with me, I'll link one right here. And yes, I'm only resorting to my fake British accent because when I try to talk like a pirate, it's way worse. Can't take me anywhere.